And today, we're jumping into a huge topic. I mean, it's really one of the biggest battles in the digital world right now.
It really is. We're talking about that fundamental tension between privacy and profit. Specifically, we're going deep into Signal, the nonprofit that's basically positioned itself as the strategic resistance against the whole surveillance economy.
This is such a critical deep dive because Signal is so much more than just another messaging app. You have to see it as a kind of blueprint for a different kind of internet.
A different economy, almost.
Exactly. And the sources we've pulled together really dig into that. Its nonprofit structure, the incredibly high cost of just refusing to sell data, and this constant defensive crouch it has to be in.
Defensive against who?
Well, against government pressure on one side and this rapidly expanding threat from AI on the other.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's start with the mission, because there's a paradox right at the heart of it.
There is. The Signal Foundation's official purpose is, let me get the quote right, to protect free expression and enable secure global communication through open source privacy technology.
That doesn't sound like a product pitch. That sounds like a declaration of principles.
It is. They're defining the app as a kind of public utility, not some consumer good that they're trying to sell you. And the people who use it, that really underscores how vital it is.
Right. Our sources mention that CISA, that's the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, calls them highly valued targets.
Highly valued targets. And you have to think about what that means in the real world.
So we're talking about journalists in war zones, right?
Right. Journalists, human rights activists, cybersecurity experts who literally cannot afford a single leak. But it's also high-profile public figures, people like New York City Mayor Eric Adams or even the musician Drake.
So when the stakes are that high state secrets, personal safety Signal becomes the go-to tool.
It's the essential tool. And the reason for that trust really comes down to the tech itself, the Signal protocol, which is the core of their end-to-end encryption. I mean, it's been the gold standard for more than a decade.
And that's a key point, because it's not just Signal using it.
No, and that's what makes it so interesting. The tech is so good, so universally recognized, that their competitors use it. When you're using end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp or even on some of Google's secure messaging, you're often using the Signal protocol.
So they're literally giving away their best technology.
They are. And that adoption is actually proof of how solid the cryptographic design is.
But wait a minute, if a giant like Meta is using the Signal protocol for WhatsApp, doesn't that sort of undercut Signal's whole reason for being? Why should I choose the small nonprofit over the giant?
That is the perfect question, and it gets to the core of this. It's the difference between the protocol and the implementation.
Okay, break that down.
So while the encryption itself, the scrambling of the message, is super strong on both platforms, Signal's real value is in everything around the message, what we call metadata.
And the business model.
And, crucially, the business model. This gets us right back to that paradox of private communication.
The very feature that makes it so valuable is also what makes it impossible to make money from.
Exactly. End-to-end encryption means Signal can't read your messages. And if they can't read your messages or see your profile data or analyze your behavior, they can't sell that data. They literally can't join the surveillance economy.
Which is why they needed a structural safeguard, a kind of firewall. They're not a startup looking for venture capital.
No, they're a 501c3 nonprofit. And that choice is deliberate. It's an anti-corporate firewall. It rejects that whole default tech model where free stuff is actually paid for with your data.
Right. There are no shareholders banging on the door demanding they sacrifice a little privacy to make the quarterly numbers look better.
Their accountability is to the users, not to investors. And you can see that in the app's design. They're trying to make what they call a straightforward interpersonal communications app.
Which means no growth hacking, no dark patterns trying to get you addicted.
None of it. No engagement maximization. They're building for utility and security, not for endless scrolling.
Which sounds great philosophically,
Right.
but in the real world it means they are fighting in a lane just completely dominated by multi-billion-dollar corporations who have zero of those concerns.
The difference in scale is just, it's almost hard to get your head around. WhatsApp has something like 3 billion monthly users. Telegram is closing in on 1 billion.
And Signal?
Signal Private Messenger has about 4.03 million monthly downloads as of August 2025. I mean, the disparity is just staggering.
So they're operating with budget of a niche organization, not a global giant.
Precisely. And you can see it in the user map. WhatsApp is everywhere, but Signal is the #1 messaging app in only 2 countries, the Netherlands and Sweden.
Yeah.
And it's no coincidence that those are two countries with incredibly strong cultural and legal traditions around privacy and civil liberties.
So where privacy is valued most, Signal comes out on top. But that just highlights how tough it is to compete when your main feature is not collecting data.
And that philosophical commitment really leads us to the person in charge of this whole operation now, Meredith Whittaker. She became president of the Signal Foundation in September 2022.
And her background is just a perfect summary of this whole anti-surveillance mission.
Yeah, it really is. She spent more than 17 years moving between industry, academia, and government. She has seen how power and technology work from every possible angle.
And she was named one of Time's 100 most influential people in AI in 2023. So she's not just some engineer, she's a major voice in the whole debate.
A huge voice. And a lot of her influence comes from her academic work, especially the AI Now Institute at NYU. She co-founded that back in 2017 with Kate Crawford.
AI Now was a huge deal.
It was groundbreaking. It was, they claimed, the first university institute really focused on the social implications of AI, and the first to be led by women. It wasn't about making AI faster or better. It was about asking, what is AI doing to our society?
And their big pushback was against that classic Silicon Valley idea that you can just sprinkle some AI on a problem like criminal justice or healthcare and fix it.
That was the core insight. They argued, and argued very forcefully, that these are social problems first. You can't just aim a machine learning model at systemic racism and expect it to disappear. You need sociologists, lawyers, historians, people who actually understand the problem.
So what were some of their big findings? What did they contribute to the conversation?
Well, their research was incredibly critical of how things were being done. Their 2017 report basically said, current framings of AI ethics are failing. Just having a corporate ethics board is not enough.
They wanted more transparency.
Radical transparency. They demanded an end to black box systems in core areas like justice and healthcare, these secret proprietary AIs that you can't audit.
You can't have justice if you can't see the code.
Exactly. And their most recent report from 2023 just came right out and said it. Any meaningful reform has to start by addressing the concentrated power of the big tech companies.
It's a straight line from that critique of corporate power to what she's doing at Signal.
It is. She's not just diagnosing the problem anymore. She's actively building the alternative. And her credibility for that comes from her direct experience. She was at Google for 13 years.
Right. She wasn't just a low-level coder. She led product and engineering teams. She founded their open research group, co-founded MLab.
But her most famous moment, the one everyone remembers, was organizing the 2018 Google walkouts.
This was huge. It wasn't just a few people.
Not at all. Over 20,000 employees around the world walked out. They were protesting the company's handling of sexual misconduct, but also its work on Project Maven.
That was the Pentagon drone AI project, right? Developing machine vision for the military.
It was a massive internal fight over ethics and military contracts. And the protests actually worked. Google did not renew the Maven contract. That moment really cemented Whittaker's reputation as someone who could organize real principled resistance from within.
And after that, she advised the White House, the FCC, the European Parliament, even did a stint at the FTC as a senior advisor on AI. She knows how the policy levers work.
So you have this core identity, a corporate insider turned activist laser-focused on dismantling surveillance capitalism. It's like she is the living embodiment of Signal's strategy.
Which brings us to the money. Because building that alternative, resisting that surveillance model, it is not cheap.
No, it is not. This gets us into the really shocking numbers behind Signal's financial reality.
So first, where does the money come from? It's all donations and grants.
Entirely. Which is just so unusual for a platform of this scale. The foundational backing came from Brian Acton,
the co-founder of WhatsApp, who famously left Facebook after they bought it.
Right. He gave Signal an initial loan of $50 million in 2018, which he later increased to $105 million. But here's a key part. It's a 0% interest loan that isn't due until the year 2068.
So for all practical purposes, it's a grant, it's runway, it's designed to give them decades of freedom from financial pressure.
Exactly. But even with that huge buffer, just keeping the lights on for a global network is insanely expensive. They're estimating they'll need about $50 million a year just to operate by 2025.
$50 million, and they call that very lean.
Very lean, especially when you compare it to their competitors who don't have to worry about respecting privacy. That $50 million is just the cost of providing the service securely. It's not profit.
So let's break that cost down, because this is where their philosophy of collect as little as possible really hits the balance sheet. Their current infrastructure bill is about $14 million a year.
And you have to remember, most tech companies store everything forever, unencrypted. That's the business. Signal does the exact opposite.
They encrypt everything end to end, and once a message is delivered, the server just purges it.
Right. It's queued temporarily, but then it's gone. But even that temporary storage isn't free. That costs them about $1.3 million a year.
Okay, so that's part of the $14 million. What else?
Servers are about 2.9 million. Bandwidth for messages, files, calls, that's another 2.8 million.
But the single biggest line item in the sources is almost half the total infrastructure cost. $6 million for registration fees. What on earth is that?
Yeah, that number is shocking. That $6 million is the cost of existing in the global telecommunications system. It covers things like sending you that SMS code when you first sign up,
The verification text?
the verification text, securing phone numbers, negotiating with carriers in every single country to make sure the service actually works. It's a huge, constant logistical and financial burden just to maintain that basic global utility.
So they're renting servers from Amazon, Google, Microsoft. But because of the encryption, those companies can't actually see the data.
Right. The cloud provider is just a dumb pipe. The keys that can decrypt the messages only exist on the user's phones.
Okay, but it's not just about avoiding bad practices. They're actively spending money on privacy features that their competitors avoid because they're too expensive. What's the costliest one?
By far, it's end-to-end encrypted calling. That one feature costs them about $1.7 million a year in bandwidth alone. That's around 20 petabytes of data.
20 petabytes. Why is it so disproportionately expensive compared to, say, WhatsApp, which is way bigger?
It comes down to one single, non-negotiable privacy feature: protecting your IP address.
How does that work?
So when you make a one-on-one call to someone who is not in your contacts, Signal always routes that call through one of their own relay servers.
Why do they need a relay?
Well, most apps will try to connect you directly, peer-to-peer. It's way cheaper and faster. But to do that, your phone and the other person's phone have to share their IP addresses with each other.
And your IP address can give away your physical location.
Your precise geographic location. So if you're a journalist calling a sensitive source or a dissident, you're basically broadcasting where you are. It's a massive security risk.
So Signal is spending $1.7 million a year just to hide your location from the person you're talking to.
That's it. They're deliberately choosing user safety over cost efficiency. Most competitors don't do this by default because it saves them a fortune, but it leaves the user exposed. It's a perfect example of prioritizing user security over the bottom line.
And another one of those expensive commitments was private contact discovery. How did they solve that problem of letting you find your friends on the app without just uploading your entire address book to their servers?
That was a huge engineering challenge they tackled way back in 2017. They developed a really novel approach using something called a trusted execution environment, or a TE.
Okay, what's a T in simple terms?
Think of it like a secure vault inside a server's processor. It's a totally isolated area. Even if the main operating system of the server gets hacked, the data inside the TE is still protected.
And what did Signal do with it?
They would take your contacts, hash them, which means scrambling them into a unique code, and upload those hashes into the T. The T could then see if your hashes match the hashes of other Signal users without Signal itself ever seeing the actual plaintext phone numbers in your address book.
That sounds incredibly complicated and expensive.
It was. At its peak, that one feature required almost 600 specialized servers and cost them over $2 million a year.
Just to avoid knowing who your friends are.
Just for that one feature.
Yeah.
Now, they've made some algorithmic breakthroughs since then, so it's down to about 10 servers. But that initial massive investment of time and money just shows how serious they are about avoiding surveillance.
It's amazing they're even encrypting things like profile pictures and names.
Right, which is totally unique. They had to develop a whole new system of profile keys to make it work, just so a hacker or an employee could just browse a database of user photos and names.
So you have all this complex, expensive infrastructure. You also need the people to build and maintain it.
And that's the other half of the budget, roughly $19 million a year. About half their operating costs goes to staff compensation.
Because they're competing for talent with the very same companies they're fighting against.
Exactly. They need top-tier cryptographers, security engineers, distributed systems experts, and they can't offer stock options or, expensive playpen offices.
So they have to try and match industry wages.
They try to get as close as they can. Whitaker has been very clear that working for a principled organization shouldn't mean you have to live in precarity. To keep that E2E guarantee solid, you have to invest in the people who maintain it.
Okay, let's pivot from Signal's internal costs to the huge external threats they're facing. Meredith Whitaker has been a major voice in defining how AI is just fundamentally changing the privacy landscape.
Yeah, this is a core part of her argument. She says AI is not some new separate thing. It's an extension of surveillance capitalism. You cannot pull them apart.
Because AI needs data to learn. Massive amounts of data.
And the whole economic engine of big tech is built on generating, collecting, and monetizing that data. So AI doesn't just use the surveillance model, it expands it. It creates more data, which feeds the AI, which creates more data. It's a feedback loop.
And this whole process reinforces the power of the few big players who have the infrastructure.
Totally. Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, they own the cloud servers, they own the vast training data sets, and maybe most importantly, they own the frameworks.
And this lets them do something that Whitaker's group called open washing.
Right. Open washing is a tricky but really important concept. It's when a company calls its AI open source, but it's not really open in the traditional sense.
So they might release the model, like Meta did with Llama 2, but it comes with a restrictive license.
Or they just offer an API. They use the word open because it has this halo of virtue. It makes them look good. But true open source is about decentralizing power, letting anyone replicate, audit, and modify the system.
And they maintain control through the tools themselves.
That's the key. Google made TensorFlow. Meta made PyTorch. These are the foundational frameworks that almost all AI researchers use. Whitaker's point is that this makes it easy for any new academic model to just snap into place inside Google or Meta's production systems.
They control the plumbing of the entire industry.
Precisely. They get to benefit from all the outside research without ever giving up their core infrastructural power. It's a way to capture the spirit of open source while keeping the monopoly intact.
And we have to talk about the human side of this, because the sources are very clear that AI is not some disembodied brain in the cloud. It's built on a huge amount of human labor.
This is such a critical point, both morally and economically. The intelligence we see in these models is created by what Whitaker calls precarious labor, usually in the majority world.
You're talking about data labelers, right? People in places like Kenya.
Yes, people doing the repetitive, grueling work of cleaning up and categorizing the data that these models are trained on. And it gets particularly dark when you look at the process called reinforcement learning with human feedback, or RLHF.
Okay, walk us through that. Why is RLHF so traumatic for the workers involved?
Well, after you train a model on, the entire internet, Reddit, 4chan, all the toxic corners, it's a mess. RLHF is the process of teaching it what's okay to say and what isn't. So you hire workers, often on terrible contracts with no support, to look at the model's outputs and rate them.
So they have to wade through all the worst stuff.
All of it. They are exposed to some of the nastiest stuff on the internet. Violent, hateful, illegal content over and over again at high speed. They're basically acting as human filters to make the model business safe.
Human shock absorbers.
Yes. And Whitaker's argument is that if these workers were paid properly, like Western-level wages, with flea benefits and long-term psychological support for the trauma they endure, the entire economic model for these giant AI systems would probably collapse. The exploitation is a core part of the business plan.
So given Signal's total opposition to that entire model, do they use any AI at all?
There is one very, very specific exception, and it's a telling one. They generally avoid all AI and machine learning, but they use a tiny, off-the-shelf, and importantly, on-device model for one thing.
Face blurring.
Face blurring in their photo editor. It's purely a defensive tool. It was added so you could share photos from protests, for example, without handing over the biometric data of other people to surveillance companies like Clearview AI.
So it's AI being used to fight surveillance.
Exactly. And Whitaker even says, this is a good use of AI, but she immediately follows that up by saying she'd rather live in a world with no facial recognition at all. Even the good use is just a reaction to a broken system.
Which brings us to what might be the biggest threat of all. The rise of these new AI agents built directly into our operating systems.
This is what Whitaker calls an existential threat. These magic genie bots that Apple, Google, and Microsoft are building into the core of iOS, Android, and Windows.
Why are they such a threat? How can they get around Signal's encryption?
Because they operate at a lower level. For an agent to be able to, say, summarize your texts or draft an email based on your calendar, It needs near total access to your digital life. That access happens at the operating system level before the data ever gets to the Signal app.
So I can read your messages, browser history, location,
Yeah.
everything.
Everything. And in the rush for this new profitable feature, Whitaker argues that these companies are throwing away basic lessons in digital security. If the AI agent on your phone can read the decrypted version of a message on your screen, the app's encryption guarantee becomes meaningless.
And this isn't just a theory. This has happened before.
It has. A few years back, it came out that Apple's Siri was sending transcripts of your voice commands from WhatsApp and end-to-end encrypted app-to-Apple servers. The OS itself compromised the app's security.
And the fear is that agentic AI just makes that the default behavior.
It makes it systematic. So
Yeah.
Signal has a very clear demand for these OS vendors.
What's the fix?
Whitaker says they need to implement a simple, well-documented switch at the OS level, a way for developers to flag their app-like Signal as a sensitive space that is completely off-limits to agents, a technical quarantine zone.
Like a digital do not disturb sign for the AI.
Exactly. And beyond that, they need radical transparency about what data the agents are accessing and what they're doing with it. The burden of proof has to be on the gatekeepers.
Okay, so moving from the tech battle to the political one, there's this really fascinating conflict around government officials using encrypted apps.
Yeah, this creates such a strange tension between the need for security and the need for public accountability. When government officials use Signal, it often looks like they're trying to skirt open records laws.
And the sources pointed to a really vivid example during the Maui wildfire crisis.
They did. There was a text exchange where one official apparently said that's what Signal was supposed to be for, which immediately and understandably raised red flags about whether official communications were being preserved for public oversight.
And this is happening everywhere.
It's widespread. The Associated Press found over 1,100 government workers across all 50 states had Signal accounts registered to their numbers.
But here's the twist. CISA, the cybersecurity agency, actually recommends that senior officials use end-to-end encrypted apps because they are highly valued targets. They need that security.
They do. So CISA supports the tool, but they also explicitly warn officials not to use it to get around public records laws. It puts the official in this really difficult position.
Have any states tried to fix this?
A few have tried, but not very effectively. Michigan banned E2E apps on state devices if they block record requests, but there were no real penalties. And in New Mexico, an official was investigated for telling employees to use Signal's disappearing messages feature, but there were no regulations in place to stop it. It's an unresolved mess.
But the biggest regulatory fight, the truly existential one for Signal, is the global push for backdoors, what they call chat controls.
This is the line in the sand. Their position here is absolute. If any country passes a law forcing them to build a backdoor into their encryption, Signal will always leave that market. Full stop.
That's a huge decision. Why not just comply in one country to keep the service running for everyone else?
Because as they see it, end-to-end encryption is a global promise. If you poke a hole in the network in one place, you've poisoned it everywhere else. A backdoor for one government is a vulnerability for everyone, everywhere. The guarantee's broken.
It's an all-or-nothing proposition.
It has to be. And it's worth noting that some countries, like Germany, have been really important allies in the EU, consistently opposing attempts to weaken encryption.
Okay, speaking of the EU, let's look at the Digital Markets Act, the DMA. This is the big regulation aimed at these gatekeepers like Apple and Google. We should be clear and just report on Apple's side of this argument. What's their take?
So the DMA forces them to do things they've always resisted, like allowing app sideloading and installing apps from outside the App Store and third-party payment systems. From Apple's perspective, they argue this introduces massive new security and privacy risks for their users in the EU.
What kind of risks?
Well, with sideloading, they point to a higher risk of malware and scams. They argue their App Store review process screens out a lot of dangerous or harmful content. They even gave an example of a pornography app called Hot Tub showing up on one of these new marketplaces.
And beyond malware, they're saying the DMA itself creates a surveillance risk.
That's their most serious claim. They say the DMA allows other companies to request access to really sensitive user data. Specifically, they said they've gotten requests for the complete content of user notifications.
So your private messages, emails, medical alerts, as they pop up on your screen.
Everything. And also a user's entire history of joined Wi-Fi networks.
Why is Wi-Fi history so much more sensitive than, say, GPS data?
Because it's so much more precise. GPS might show you were in a certain neighborhood, But your Wi-Fi history shows exactly which hospital, which lawyer's office, which specific clinic you visited, and how often. It allows for incredibly granular, persistent tracking. Apple's position is that being forced to share this data puts EU users at a profoundly higher risk of surveillance.
And finally, they've said the DMA is why some new features are delayed in Europe.
That's right. They claim that the engineering work required to make new AI features like live translation or iPhone mirroring interoperable with non-Apple devices, as the DMA requires, is really complex. They say they can't do it securely yet without risking user data, so they've been forced to delay the launch for EU users.
So it's this perfect example of a regulatory bind. The attempt to open the system up for competition might, at least according to the gatekeeper, end up reducing security and privacy for everyone.
Exactly. And whether you think Apple's motives are about protecting users or protecting their monopoly, the outcome is the same. It creates these new, really high-stakes trade-offs for you, the end user.
Okay, so we've covered Signal's philosophy, the leadership behind it, the incredible cost of their model, and the threats from AI and regulation. When you put it all together, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the synthesis is that Signal is just. It's a conscious choice. It's a costly, continuous, and really difficult effort to exist completely outside the economic rules of modern tech.
That $50 million a year budget we talked about, that's not for growth or for shareholders.
No, that is the price of integrity. It's the cost of just sustaining their encrypted network against this rising tide of surveillance capitalism, of AI agents trying to look over your shoulder, and of governments demanding a key to the back door.
It completely reframes what we think free communication actually costs.
It does. And it forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. Signal needs $50 million a year just to operate without selling you out. So if that is the lean, transparent price of real privacy.
Then what is the unseen price? The hidden human cost that we all pay every single day for the supposedly free services from the big profit-driven platforms, the ones built on exploiting labor, on tracking your Wi-Fi, on undermining your security for their own gain. That unseen price, that's the real cost of convenience.
That's it.
And that's the thought we want to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.